hardest thing for him to ever do was to talk to anybody about how he felt. So he's practiced. And when you practice, you get better. Like you do with anything, like you get better at your career, that you get better at anything. If you want to practice handling your feelings, you practice and you get better. And that's what he did. Now, I want to talk about some of the things we do that I think might be useful for you in working with some of your cohorts, your compadres. One of the things we look at and we work on is prevention. And what I'm talking about is a preventative way of thinking. And a great sort of metaphor for that is Aikido, which is a martial art of reconciliation. Any of you familiar with Aikido? You're probably familiar with some form of martial arts anyway. Now, in this country, we think about kicking people's butts with martial arts. But really, martial arts is about learning how not to do that. It's a spiritual way of thinking. And there are three basic premises in Aikido. The first is don't put yourself in the situation. Now, when you're in combat, you're kind of stuck with that. That's a different place. But you're coming home, so think about it. What this means is learn how to read yourself. Learn how to see where you're at. Pay attention to any signals and cues you have about how you feel. And then pay attention to the other person that you have to connect with, that you have to communicate with, whether that's a family member, whether that's someone, a colleague that you work with. Pay attention to where they're at too, because the best communication comes if your timing's good. The second thing is, if you find yourself in a negative situation, think your way out of it. Use your head as best you can. Now, in combat, most of us are, and I haven't been in combat, but I have been attacked in the elevator. And that's kind of a combat situation. Think your way out of it as best you can. And the third thing is that violence is a last resort. Violent communication, violent action. Once again, except in self-defense. But most of the arguments that we have with our partners at home feel like self-defense. They just aren't. Because feelings aren't truth, they're just feelings. So we feel like self-defense, we're triggered into fight versus flight, but the truth is, if we step back from it, we have a chance to think about it. Now, there was a martial arts expert from this country, a black belt in martial arts, who went to Japan and was riding Shinkansen, the speed train in Japan. And when he got on the train, he saw a man who was very aggressive. He was drunk. He smelled bad. He was aggressive. He had started picking on people, and he just pushed a woman. The martial arts expert from this country started to go after him. He was on his way to attack this guy. Right before he could, an elderly man went up to this really aggressive guy, and he says, "Hey, what have you got in your lunchbox?" Kind of threw the guy off, and he said, "Persimmons and soup." And the old man said, "Oh, you do?" He said, "I grow persimmons. What kind of persimmons do you have? Because I have a persimmon tree." And and the guy told him, and he was still kind of, the aggressive guy was kind of taken aback, but it slowed him down. So he said to him, "Well, what kind of soup do you have?" I mean, and the guy told him, and he said, "You must have a wife who loves you a lot to spend the time to make that soup." And the man began to cry. And he said, "I had a wife who loved me until 3 weeks ago, and my wife died." And when the martial arts expert from this country started to leave, this man was lying with his head in the lap of this elderly man who was touching him and telling him it would be okay. And he said, "I learned the real meaning of Aikido. It's getting to the heart. It's getting past the, these behaviors, the drinking, the violence, the aggression. It's getting past that and getting to the root of what is happening." And I think that is the job of a friend, I think that is the job of a caring coworker, is to get to the root of somebody else's issue as best you can. Now, in this prevention, I started thinking about how we perceive things. And I was, we all have hot buttons. Everybody here have a hot button, something that when it happens, it just sort of pisses you off on a regular basis. Now, in California, one of our hot buttons is the freeway during rush hour. Now, I don't know how many of you have that. I think anybody who lives near a big city has it, and it's relative. But you know, I used to believe people were just kind of hired to piss me off on the freeway because they would, you know, they would pull in front of you, they would tailgate you, they would do all kinds of things. And I have some guys in my program who use the freeway as a target for their aggression. One of the guys used to carry raw fruit in his car. We called him the drive-by fruiter because he used to just peg people with raw fruit when they, you know, get to him. And we had another guy that was a Teamster who used to pull people off the freeway in his 18-wheeler and trash them when he got them off the side of the road. But I thought, I drove on the Autobahn. Have any of you driven on the Autobahn? Some people have driven on the Autobahn. I thought the Autobahn was really fun because I sort of fashioned myself as a race car driver in my fantasies. And you can drive as fast as you want. It's in kilometers, so you feel like you're going a lot faster because it says like 100 and 120. You're really not doing that, but you feel like you're speeding, and you're only limited by your engine size. Now, I'm driving on the Autobahn, and what I'm noticing is that people are not getting all hot about somebody tailgating them, and they don't give you the courtesy like 10 to 20 feet they give you in California. They're like on your tail. Now, when you live in California, you know how to handle this. You simply slam on the brake, you let them rear-end you, and then you sue them for their chalet in another country. But I'm watching people, and they're just pulling over. They're letting the other person pass. Nobody's doing this, flipping anybody off. They're not doing any of that. They're just letting them go. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a cool way to drive. Now, later I found out there's a giant fine attached to not pulling over. But one of the things I thought was really cool was that even with a fine attached, you can still have an attitude, right? You can still have feelings about it. You can still be upset about it. And they weren't. Because their perception wasn't that you're doing a disservice to me as a human being. You're like all over me. It's not a personal affront. In this country, I think we take a lot of this stuff. The meaning is it's a personal attack on me. And whenever you take something personally, your rage and anger level goes up. So I came back to California and I thought, I am going to drive like this because this is really cool. You know, I'm going to be very calm. And my first day back, I got to practice because a guy pulled out in front of me. I had to slam on my brake. I fishtailed. And I'm looking at him. And I think, what do I want to have happen here? And this is how I like people to begin to think. What do I want to have happen, and what's the best way to get there? So I thought, well, you know, if I yell at him, he's going to yell back at me, and we're going to lose the moment. Really, all I care about is that he pays attention. So I just went like this. He said, thank you, thank you. He said something with a U on the end of it anyway. And he took off, I took off, and when I went to group that night, I said, you know, we don't have to change the whole picture. We just have to adjust the frame a little. So let's talk about when we know we're going into difficult situations, a different way to think. If you're home and you're having problems at home, how do you think? What problem-solving ways do you think? The kind of stuff you do at work every day. The kind of stuff you have to do in combat, the kind of stuff you have to do when you're not in combat. You're creative in your thinking when you have to solve problems with a coworker. How many of you in here have ever felt like telling a boss, a commanding officer to shove it? Yeah, is there anybody who hasn't? You don't have to raise your hands. And if you're the and if you're commanding officer, somebody's on top of you. You gotta hate the people in Washington or somebody who's telling you what to do. But how many of you routinely tell your commanding officers to shove it? No, you don't, because a couple of reasons. One is that there are logical consequences, right? You're really going to get nailed if you tell your commanding officer to shove it, or your boss to shove it. The second thing is there are witnesses, and we're all better when there are witnesses. That doesn't tend to be true at home. It's easier to act out at home than it is to act out in public. Now, I always remember this. When my kids were teenagers and I got angry at them, and I would tell you that I raised my voice at them, they would probably tell you that I was yelling at them. And the phone rang, and I don't know why I answered the phone, but I picked it up and I said, "Oh, hi." And my kids are looking at me like, demon seed? What, you know, how can you just drop that? But it's very interesting how quickly we can change when we have to. How quickly we can change how we look when there's someone else paying attention. So we started thinking about what are the kinds of things we can do when we're going in difficult situations. We're talking about the freeway. What is it that makes, when you're going to have a bad drive somewhere, what is it that's going to make that drive better? Well, people said they listen to the radio. They listen to music. They listen to books on tape. I personally have a book called Auto Aerobics. Have any of you seen that? Auto Aerobics is a little book, how to make your car a floating gym, a rolling gym. Basically, try this on your way when you're driving the next time. Grab your steering wheel and push in. Hold. I can do this for a long time now. Release. Do that about 20 times. By the time you get home, you're totally buff. If you're older, your arms aren't flopping around as much, your neck's a little firmer, and your chest is kind of perky. If you have a cruise control, you can do Thighmaster things with your legs, and leg lifts and that sort of thing. And if you have a sunroof, you can do these stretches right out the top, and people think you're waving at them, and you make friends on the freeway. So we do a lot of work with how people see things, because that's important. When you think about depression, it's about perception, right? Think about being in a really good mood. You're in a really good mood. You're walking down the street. Somebody you know walks by you and they don't say hi to you. And you're thinking to yourself, because you're in a good mood, they probably didn't see me. Maybe they're preoccupied. It's about them. But if you're in a really bad mood and the same thing happens, going, well, are they mad at me? I mean, what's the deal here? Are they mad? I thought they were my friend. I can't even believe they're ignoring me. Well, maybe I don't have any friends and I'll die alone. You know, I mean, what you do is you go to an extreme based on your mood. So part of this is the recognition of where you are. Now, I want to talk a little bit about styles. Styles of anger. And one of the places where I saw this, well, let me ask you first of all, think about how you would consider yourself, or how you consider yourself to be around styles of anger. How many of you would consider yourselves to be more volatile? And what I mean by that is maybe you talk louder when you're angry, use your hands, maybe the veins stand out in your neck, maybe you throb, your head throbs, maybe your voice gets louder, maybe you drool a little bit out of the corner of your mouth. How many of you would consider yourselves more volatile when you get angry? And the rest of you are kind of passive-aggressive, is that right? Okay, so think about it. Think about what it means to you when, and most of you are probably in a relationship with someone who does anger differently than you do. Mostly we don't get into relationships with people who approach anger the way we do. Now, if you've got a partner who is very volatile, and they come at you and they're yelling or they're raising their voice,